The slap echoed beneath chandeliers, and my sister clapped like it was theater. We were on livestream, 88 guests watching, while my father's hand left a mark that burned hotter than wine. My mother laughed, calling me a barren waste, and Sophie shouted for the house to be signed over to her. Phones froze, comments flooded, yet no one stopped it. I felt my chest crack with shame, but I also saw the cameras still rolling. If I surrendered, I'd vanish forever. Instead, I pressed one quiet call, the kind that could end their show and begin my freedom. The ballroom shimmered like a carefully staged illusion, a palace of chandeliers and crystal glasses polished until they looked unreal. Every detail of my parents' 40th wedding anniversary had been curated for the camera, because of course the event was live-streamed for thousands to admire. To the world, we were the perfect American family, successful, elegant, unbreakable. But I knew better. I had known it for years. I stood behind a column, placed there by design, my chair angled so I couldn't even see the stage clearly. My name card was written in looping calligraphy, but tucked so far down the table that I may as well have been invisible. Sophie, my younger sister, sat next to my parents on the dais, radiant in a sequined dress, her 2 children climbing onto her lap as though they were props. The cameras adored her, and my parents adored her even more. "Our pride, our legacy," my father declared into the microphone, raising his glass toward Sophie. The audience clapped, the live stream comments scrolled with hearts, and my mother dabbed at her eyes in mock tears. I knew my cue was to smile, nod, and act grateful for the family I belonged to. Instead, I sipped my champagne and tried not to choke on the bitterness. When the camera swept across the room, I forced a grin. But just for a second, my mask slipped. My lips tightened, my brows drew together, and a small frown betrayed me. I thought no one would notice. But the lens noticed everything. And as the feed rolled on, the comments lit up. "Why does the older sister look so miserable?" "She seems jealous." Not a good vibe. The evening continued, gilded and hollow. Speeches praised love, loyalty, and the gift of grandchildren. Sophie's name was mentioned in every toast. My own achievements, years of work in a career I'd fought tooth and nail for, were absent, scrubbed away like an inconvenient stain. My hands tightened around the stem of my glass. I could feel the cameras still circling and the facade tightening like a cage around me. Later, when the live stream ended and the guests drifted away, the real family gathering began. I had barely stepped into the hallway when my mother seized my arm. Her nails dug into my skin as she hissed, "You embarrassed us. Couldn't you smile for once? You looked like a ghost out there." "I was smiling," I muttered, though my voice wavered. "Not enough," she snapped. "Do you know how many people noticed? You made us look bad. Sophie shines and you drag us down. You always do." Her words landed with the precision of a scalpel, designed not to wound in one blow, but to carve slowly until I bled from within. Before I could answer, Sophie appeared at my side, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. "Don't be so harsh, Mom," she said sweetly. "Clara just needs time. She's always been sensitive." Her eyes glistened with manufactured concern. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect sister defending me. But as we walked away, she slipped her phone into her hand, and within minutes, her story went live. "When your sister can't be happy for you because she has no children of her own." I saw it only later, when the screen lit up in my hotel room, dozens of her friends and followers chiming in with pity for her, scorn for me. I felt the sting of betrayal sharper than the champagne bubbles still fizzing in my throat. For a moment, I even wondered if they were right. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe the fault had always been mine. That was the cruelest trick of all. They made me doubt my own reality. I changed out of my dress in the powder room, trying to shake the evening off my skin. My reflection looked tired, older than 37. As I reached for my clutch, something fell to the floor with a quiet thud. A folded document, heavy with legal lettering, slid halfway out of the gift bag I had been given. Curious, I bent down and opened it. My heart lurched. It was a deed transfer. My parents' house, our grandparents' house, already prepared for my signature, transferring full rights to Sophie. A yellow sticky note clung to the top. Routine paperwork. Sign when you can. Love. Mom. The walls seemed to close in. The chandeliers from the ballroom still glowed in my memory, but now they looked like the bars of a cage. My pulse hammered in my ears. So that was their plan. Tonight hadn't been about celebrating 40 years of marriage. It had been about staging Sophie as heir, cementing her as the golden child, and erasing me from the family's legacy altogether. I folded the paper back into the bag, my hands trembling. Behind me, I heard laughter echoing down the hallway. My parents, Sophie, and her children basking in the afterglow of their performance. I felt the cold weight of the deed in my hand, and for the first time that night, I didn't just feel humiliated. I felt hunted. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard the faint ping of another notification, another comment, another whisper from the world outside this gilded prison. My story was already being written without me, but for the first time, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe it was time to take the pen back. The silence after the anniversary party didn't last long. Within days, a new group chat appeared, one I was not invited to but heard about from a distant cousin who still pitied me. It was where my parents and Sophie discussed the future of the family assets. I was not listed as a participant, not even as a footnote. My name had been erased as if my existence was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. The sting of exclusion was sharp, but sharper still was the realization that they hadn't even bothered to hide it. Soon after, the internet became their weapon. Clips from the anniversary livestream began circulating on TikTok, chopped and spliced to tell a story that wasn't mine. A freeze frame of my frown became a meme. The jealous sister face. Another video highlighted Sophie's children embracing her, while I sat in the background, cut to look like I was rolling my eyes. The captions read, "Some sisters never grow up." Strangers commented with fury, their words cutting into me with the intimacy of family spite. The narrative shifted quickly. Overnight, I became the villain in my own family's fairy tale. Old friends unfollowed me, colleagues looked at me differently, and even the barista at my favorite cafe handed me coffee with an awkward silence where small talk used to be. It was astonishing how swiftly the world turned when your blood turned against you in public. At night, alone in my small apartment, I tried to steady myself. I pulled out the only anchor I had left, a framed photograph of my grandmother. She had been the one person who ever seemed to notice me, to see past the shadows Sophie cast. In the photo, her hands were clasped over mine, both of us smiling at something just out of frame. I stared at it for a long time, whispering, "At least you loved me. At least you did." For a moment, I let myself believe it was enough, that one person's love could sustain me against an entire family's betrayal. But the quiet didn't last. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Watch out, they're planning to cut you out for good." My chest tightened. The words glowed on the screen like a curse. I looked around the empty apartment, but there was no one there, no one I could ask for clarity. The poison was spreading, and it was systematic. When the family called for a meeting, I already knew what it was about. The moment I entered the living room of my parents' house, the atmosphere was thick with rehearsed hostility. My father leaned forward in his chair, his jaw tight. "You're 37 years old, Clara," he barked. "What do you have to show for it? You live alone, no children, no husband. You've done nothing for this family. You're nothing but a leech." I froze, the words slicing clean through me. Around us, relatives shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Sophie dabbed at her eyes, phone angled discreetly, already broadcasting. "Dad, please don't," she whimpered, voice cracking with practiced fragility. "I just want her to love me. Why does she hate me so much? Why can't she be happy for me?" The comments poured in instantly. Her live stream lit up with strangers who took her side without hesitation. Poor Sophie. Her sister sounds toxic. Some people can't stand when others succeed. I wanted to scream, to tear the phone from her hands, to shout the truth until my throat bled. But I stood silent, paralyzed. In that moment, I understood the final role they had cast me in. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the overlooked sister, or even the scapegoat. I was the sacrifice, the vessel into which they could pour all their failures and shame. The realization settled into my bones with a chill deeper than any winter. I had become the family's official villain, and villains, once named, are no longer defended. As the meeting ended, I stumbled into the hallway, my body heavy, my breath shallow. A catering staff member lingered by the door, his eyes flicking nervously between me and the others. When our gazes met, he stepped closer, pressing a small object into my hand. A USB drive. "You need to see this," he whispered quickly, before disappearing down the corridor. I stared at the tiny piece of plastic, its weight disproportionate to its size. For the first time in days, a spark of something unfamiliar lit in my chest. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest suggestion that maybe I was not as alone as they wanted me to be. The night of my mother's birthday was meant to be another performance, another glossy stage to show the world how perfect our family was. The chandeliers glowed, violins played, and guests clinked their glasses, pretending to bask in our harmony. The cameras were everywhere, set to stream live once more, capturing each polished smile. But beneath the shine, I felt the tension building like static, waiting for a spark to ignite it. That spark came faster than I expected. My father stood to make a toast, his words slurred by wine but sharp with intent. "To my beloved wife," he declared, raising his glass. "The mother who gave us everything we could ever ask for. Children, grandchildren, a future." The crowd clapped. His eyes shifted to me. "Well, almost everything." The laughter was thin, nervous, but it gave him permission. He set the glass down and walked across the floor. I barely had time to register the cameras turning before his hand struck me across the face. The sound cracked like thunder, silencing the violin's mid-note. Gasps filled the room. 88 guests froze, trapped between instinct and etiquette. Some reached for their phones, others lowered their eyes. Sophie, though, wasted no time. She sprang to her feet, clapping her hands with a smile that belonged more to a circus than a celebration. "Give the house to someone who deserves it," she cried, her voice bright, triumphant. The cameras drank in every word. My mother leaned back, laughter bubbling from her lips like acid. "You are nothing but a barren waste," she said, her tone dripping with contempt. "A useless shell who will never carry our legacy." The world blurred. My cheek burned, my ears rang, and my chest hollowed out as though the slap had emptied me from the inside. The comments on the live stream flooded in, hearts and shocked emojis, words of judgment spilling across the screen. I wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the floor, but instead I stood frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, in the chaos, the USB slipped from my purse, clattering to the floor. A guest bent down to pick it up, handing it back with an awkward glance. For a moment, the screen behind the stage flickered as if it had been triggered by the device. A frozen image appeared, my grandmother's face, grainy but resolute. Her voice echoed faintly from the speakers, just a fragment caught before the feed cut out. "If they ever hurt her, give this to the keeper of the trust." The room erupted with whispers, confusion spreading like wildfire. My father barked at the staff to shut it down, but the damage was done. The image of my grandmother lingered in my mind long after the lights dimmed. When I finally stumbled back to my apartment, I closed every blind, shut off every light, and powered down my phone. The world outside could wait. I needed to disappear. Days blurred together, one long stretch of silence and shadows. I deleted every social media account, closed every message without reading it, and let my phone die on the kitchen counter. The quiet should have comforted me, but it only made the voices louder. Maybe they're right. Maybe you are nothing. Maybe you deserve this. The words spiraled in my head, looping endlessly until I believed them. I stopped eating, stopped answering calls from the few friends who still tried. I told myself it was better this way. Better to fade quietly than to keep fighting a war I had already lost. One night, curled on the couch in the dark, I pressed play on an old tape I had found months before. My grandmother's voice filled the room, shaky but kind, telling me stories about her garden, about the way she used to sneak me cookies when my parents weren't looking. The sound broke me open. Tears poured down my face, soaking the pillow as I clutched the recorder to my chest. For the first time, I let the grief show, raw and unfiltered. If anyone had been watching, they would have seen not a warrior, but a woman, cracked and human, aching for the one person who had ever loved her unconditionally. When the tears slowed, I picked up the USB. My hands shook as I slid it into my laptop, half afraid of what it might reveal. The screen lit up, folders labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. Documents, recordings, scans of old deeds. My breath caught as I clicked through. There it was, evidence that decades ago my parents had coerced her into signing away her ownership of the house. Legal language twisted into submission, her shaky signature marked with notes of protest. My grandmother had kept everything, every letter, every receipt, every attempt at resistance. She had left it behind as if she knew, someday, I would need it. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The truth was here, undeniable, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope yet, not fully, but it was a spark, a reason, a path forward, waiting for me to take the first step. The documents on the USB glared back at me, page after page of proof that my parents had once manipulated my grandmother, forcing her to sign away her rights to the very house they now dangled over my head. Reading her shaky handwriting, I felt her presence stronger than ever, as if she had left this breadcrumb trail specifically for me. The realization crashed over me with equal parts grief and fury. History wasn't just repeating itself, it was being orchestrated step by the same hands. My parents had done this before, and now they were doing it to me. For days, the anger simmered until it became something else, something sharper. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I had been manipulated, gaslit, and sacrificed on the altar of their legacy. Knowing that truth shifted something inside me. The weight of doubt slipped away, replaced by a raw clarity that burned through the fog. I am not broken, I whispered into the empty apartment. I was made to believe I was. Saying it out loud felt like breaking a curse. I turned to the only place where anonymity could become solidarity, an online support group for survivors of toxic families. My hands trembled as I typed out my story, half expecting silence or judgment. Instead, replies poured in. People who had lived versions of my nightmare reached out, their words wrapping around me like armor. You're not alone. They trained you to think you were the problem. You can fight back. For the first time in my life, I felt the stirrings of a community. Strangers across the country knew exactly what it was like to be the scapegoat, the one everyone turned against. Their validation was oxygen. Among them, one message stood out. A woman named Margaret H. typed, "If your grandmother left a trust, the original trustee may still be alive. He has the power to reverse everything. Find him." The words sent a jolt through me. I reread them, heart hammering. My grandmother had mentioned a trustee in passing, someone she trusted when no one else in the family could be trusted. If he was still alive, then maybe, just maybe, this story didn't have to end with me crushed under their schemes. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I cataloged everything I had. Screenshots of Sophie's stories, recordings of live streams where my parents humiliated me, the documents on the USB. I built folders, labeled timelines, created backups. My laptop became a vault of truth, every file another brick in the wall I was constructing against them. By morning, I called an attorney whose name had been recommended in the support group. She was blunt, efficient, and terrifyingly calm as she flipped through the evidence I sent. "They violated fiduciary duty," she said flatly. "The trust clause about abusive behavior could be triggered. You have more than enough to challenge them." Her certainty was a lifeline. For once, Someone who knew the law was telling me I wasn't powerless. Armed with her advice, I doubled down on my own resilience. I began meditating each morning, sitting cross-legged by the window as sunlight poured in. At first, my mind buzzed with fear, replaying every insult, every slap, every laugh. But over time, I learned to quiet the noise, to let it pass like clouds. I wrote in a journal every night, spilling the thoughts I used to swallow. I set rules. No answering late-night calls from my parents, no reading Sophie's stories, no returning to the group chats I'd been excluded from. Boundaries that had once felt impossible now became lines I etched into stone. One afternoon, I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat at the small kitchen table. The steam curled upward, the taste was ordinary, yet everything about the moment felt new. For the first time in years, I caught my reflection in the window and didn't look away. I smiled, small, tentative, but real. Hope flickered in my chest, fragile but undeniable. If anyone had been watching, they would have seen not a victim, not a villain, but a woman on the cusp of becoming something else entirely. As twilight fell, I spread the evidence across my desk one last time. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, urging me forward. My fingers hovered over my phone, trembling but steady enough to press the one number I had been given in the support group. The line rang, each tone stretching into eternity. The call wasn't to my parents. It wasn't to Sophie. It was to the one person my grandmother had trusted above all others. The man who still held authority over the family trust. The man who could change everything. I gripped the phone tight, my pulse pounding in my ears, waiting for the click that would tell me someone had answered. The voice on the other end of the line was steady, aged, and unmistakably firm. "This is Samuel Kent," he said, introducing himself as the trustee who had overseen my grandmother's estate for decades. When I explained who I was and what I had discovered, there was no hesitation in his reply. "Your grandmother anticipated this. She left provisions. Send me everything you have." By dawn the next day, every file was in his possession. The video clips of the slap, the group chat screenshots, Sophie's public posts, and the documents from the USB. Hours later, I received confirmation that the trust had been locked, assets frozen. No funds could move, no property could change hands until a full review was completed. For the first time in years, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. My parents and Sophie didn't find out until their cards were declined at the country club. Within hours, my phone exploded with calls I ignored. Then came the emails, sharp at first. "You'll regret this, Clara," then desperate. "We need to talk, please, you don't understand." But the one that rattled them most wasn't from me. It was from the trust office, demanding they appear before the board and provide explanations for patterns of abusive conduct toward a beneficiary. The hearings weren't public, but the fallout bled into the open. Sophie, cornered, panicked in the only way she knew how. She went live. Her stream was shaky, her mascara streaked down her cheeks as she sobbed into the camera. "I never wanted this," she wailed, voice cracking with performative sincerity. "I just wanted my sister's love, but my parents pushed me into it. They made me. Please don't blame me." The comments poured in, confusion mixing with outrage. Wait, didn't she celebrate when Clara was hit? So now it's the parents' fault? This family is insane. The tide was shifting, the perfect image unraveling strand by strand. Behind closed doors, the implosion grew louder. My father accused Sophie of betrayal, calling her an ungrateful opportunist. My mother shrieked that it had been his heavy hand, not hers, that ruined everything. Sophie screamed back that she was the real victim, that she had only ever done what they asked. Their voices rose, clashing until no one could tell where blame ended and desperation began. For years, I had been the receptacle of all their rage, the vessel for their venom. But with me stepping aside, their poison turned inward. The spectacle was grotesque and oddly liberating. They clawed at each other because there was no longer a scapegoat to absorb the blows. Online, the world watched in shock. Articles appeared overnight, headlines screaming about the Hayes family meltdown. Commentators replayed clips of Sophie clapping at my humiliation, spliced against her tearful livestream blaming our parents. The family that once paraded itself as an emblem of perfection now stood naked in its dysfunction. Every contradiction laid bare. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cheer. I sat alone in my apartment, tea cooling in my hands, staring out the window as city lights flickered like restless stars. I felt both heavy and light, as though a great burden had been lifted but left behind scars that would never fade. A part of me mourned, not for them, but for the illusion I had clung to for so long, the fantasy of belonging to a family that could never exist. Breathing slowly, I let the quiet in. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in their noise. For the first time, I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and strong. Then came the final twist of the knife. An email from Samuel Kent landed in my inbox late that evening. His words were calm, professional, and devastating in their certainty. After initial review, the board has determined there is sufficient evidence to warrant a public investigation into the management of the Hayes Trust. A formal inquiry will be opened, and the findings will be disclosed to all relevant parties. Public investigation, disclosure. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The announcement came on a gray morning, tucked into the back pages of the city paper, but impossible to miss online. The trust had completed its review. Assets would be redistributed under new management, with provisions that no coercion or abuse would ever dictate the course of inheritance again. For my parents and Sophie, it meant their reign of intimidation was finished. For me, it meant freedom, not just in numbers on a balance sheet, but in the knowledge that their claws had finally been pried off my life. When the news broke, something unexpected happened. People who had once sneered at me online, who had reposted Sophie's sob stories and mocked my silence, began to send apologies. Public posts appeared. We were wrong. I judged too quickly. Clara, you deserved better. Reading them, I felt no rush of triumph, only a soft ache, like touching a bruise that was healing. The validation was welcome, but it came late, after so much damage had already been done. Still, it reminded me that truth had a way of seeping out, even through the thickest walls of lies. Family members who had stood by in silence also began to stir. A cousin called to confess she had always known the favoritism was cruel, but felt powerless to speak. An uncle sent me a letter admitting he had seen my grandmother's fear years ago, but lacked the courage to intervene. Their words didn't erase the years of complicity, but they mattered. They meant I wasn't screaming into the void anymore. I wasn't alone. Late one evening, as I sorted through stacks of official correspondence, I found a plain envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in careful script. I was once where you are now. Thank you for being brave enough to stand when I could not. There was no signature, no return address, only those words. I held the letter for a long time, my eyes burning. Somewhere out there, someone understood exactly what it had cost me to stand my ground. That knowledge was its own kind of inheritance. With the legal storm behind me, I turned my attention to something simpler, something mine. I bought a modest apartment not far from the river, its windows wide enough to catch the morning light. The first day I woke there, I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the small wooden table by the window. The silence was not heavy anymore. It was gentle. Each sip tasted like permission. For the first time in years, I was not bracing for the next blow. I began volunteering at a women's center, drawn to those whose stories mirrored mine in fragments. Some had been cut out of inheritances, others stripped of dignity by siblings or parents who wielded love like a weapon. I listened, I shared, I helped them gather evidence or set boundaries. Slowly, almost without realizing it, I became a mentor. The work was painful, yes, but also redemptive. Each woman I guided was a reminder that my suffering had not been wasted. It had been transformed into a bridge. One afternoon, sitting with a young woman who trembled as she confessed her family had disowned her for refusing to sign over her wages, I felt something click inside me. This was the point all along. Revenge had never been about making them suffer. It was about making myself whole. The sweetest justice was not their downfall, but my freedom. They remained trapped in the toxic web they had spun, while I stepped into the open air, unchained. On a quiet night, I placed my grandmother's photograph on the shelf above my desk. Her eyes, kind and knowing, seemed to watch me as I whispered, "I've done it. I've lived as myself." A tear slid down my cheek, but this time it wasn't grief, it was gratitude. She had left me the tools, but I had chosen to use them. I had chosen to live. The journey hadn't made me invincible. It had made me real, scarred, imperfect, but resilient. I smiled through the tears, the kind of smile that doesn't fade quickly, the kind that lingers because it's rooted in truth. The story was no longer theirs to write. It was mine.